The Galactic Senate. Hey, what a joke, right? But I suppose I should introduce myself. The name's Krill Vortek, third secretary to the Dorixian ambassador, and quite frankly, the only one with enough brain cells in our delegation to document what actually happened that day. You know how it is with these formal gatherings, all pomp, excessive circumstance, and enough hot air to inflate a small moon. The Grand Senate chamber on Nexus Prime was designed to intimidate, with its ridiculous 50-meter-high ceilings and those absurd holographic constellations that changed depending on which species was speaking. A symbol of unity, they called it. Sure, just like my 3 divorces were mutual agreements. That particular day, oh, what was it? The 87th rotation of the Galactic Standard Year 4626. Not that it matters now. The place was packed with representatives from all 247 recognized sentient species. There's Governor Blixnar with his 17 Iastalks, each one looking at a different ambassador's aide. Ambassador Tuzka from the methane-breathing Vordani Collective was floating in her containment bubble, probably plotting how to annex another mining asteroid without anyone noticing. Order. The Senate will come to order. Grand Chancellor Pel Nexus was banging his ceremonial gavel, which, between you and me, was just a glorified rock attached to a stick. His blue-gray scales were flaring at the neck, always a sign he was about to throw one of his famous tantrums. The esteemed representatives will please cease their subcommittee discussions and direct their attention to the main floor. Nobody paid him any attention, of course. The Rigelian delegation was too busy arguing with the Zentari about fishing rights in the Caspian Nebula. Your trawlers are harvesting our stellar plankton. Those are naturally occurring energy signatures, not your property. Then there was Ambassador Luca Trell from Proxima Centauri, who couldn't stop bragging about his new quantum phase disruptor. It can vaporize a small moon. Not that we would ever use it for anything other than scientific purposes. He winked all 4 of his eyes simultaneously. Show off. I was busy typing notes into my datapad, pretending to care about the trade agreement with the silicon consciousness of Betelgeuse, but honestly, I was playing Galactic Invaders under the table. My high score was approaching legendary status. Chancellor Pel Nexus finally managed to quiet the chamber, his voice booming through the translator modules. Today's agenda includes the petition from the Zorblax Federation regarding their border dispute with the... That's when the massive doors at the far end of the chamber slid open with a hiss. Not the main doors, mind you. Not the ceremonial entrance, where dignitaries normally paraded through with their entourages and sycophants. No, these were the service doors, the ones used by maintenance droids and catering staff. The chamber fell silent. 247 species, over 900 representatives, all suddenly quiet as a vacuum. Even the methane bubbles from Ambassador Tuzka stopped their perpetual gurgling. Who dares interrupt the Galactic Senate proceedings? Chancellor Pel Nexus demanded, his voice cracking slightly. And there, framed in the doorway, stood a figure that most of the Senate had only heard about in reports or seen in heavily restricted broadcasts. A human. Not just any human. No, this one was different. You could tell by the way every security officer's appendage instinctively moved toward their weapon, only to freeze halfway. Little did we know that our perfectly structured, rigidly hierarchical, comfortably corrupt little galactic community was about to change forever. And I had just beaten my high score too. Terrible timing. I should probably tell you about the first time we encountered humans. It wasn't exactly what you'd call a diplomatic success. More like watching a cargo ship crash into a sun, fascinating, terrifying, and ultimately changing the galactic landscape forever. It was about 30 rotations ago when the Malkori Empire, those arrogant, 6-limbed warmongers with their Emperor Vrax'Zenith, decided to expand their territory into what they thought was an unremarkable system at the edge of the Orion Arm. Primitive beings, their scouts reported back. Pre-FTL civilization on the 3rd planet. Excellent slave stock potential. Hey. Excellent slave stock, I still laugh about that. Like trying to domesticate a supernova. The Malkori sent their standard submission fleet 12 warships, enough to intimidate most pre-space civilizations into becoming their newest protectorate. What they didn't expect was for these humans to detect their approach, analyze their ship configurations, identify their weapons systems, and prepare a counter-offensive, all before the Malkori even exited their FTL corridor. The primitives have projectile weapons. Commander Zulthrak had reported dismissively to the Senate when questioned later. Primitive chemical propellants and nuclear warheads. What the commander failed to mention was how those primitive weapons had been modified to target the specific resonance frequency of Malkori shield generators, or how the humans had somehow managed to hack into their communication systems and broadcast detailed instructions for surrender in perfect Malkori standard. We lost 3 capital ships before we could even establish orbital superiority, Zulthrak finally admitted under questioning. His lower mandibles were clicking in distress, the equivalent of a human sweating bullets. They used our own targeting systems against us. Chancellor Pell Nexus had nearly molted on the spot. Impossible. A pre-FTL species cannot possibly reverse engineer Malkori technology. But they had. And what's more, they'd captured 2 Malkori vessels intact, complete with crew. Within 1 local solar year, they'd not only mastered FTL technology but improved upon it. The footage from their first diplomatic contact still circulates in classified channels. A human female, Admiral Rena Blackwood, standing before the Emergency Council, not cowering or pleading as expected from a primitive species but making demands. The Malkori Empire will withdraw from all human-claimed systems immediately, she had stated, no tremor in her voice, despite standing before representatives of civilizations thousands of years more advanced than her own. Any further aggression will be met with appropriate force. Or what Emperor Vrax'Zenith had sneered from his holographic projection, "You will throw more rocks at our ships." Admiral Blackwood had simply smiled. Not a friendly smile. No, it was the kind of smile my 4th clutch parent used to give right before someone received a very painful lesson. "We've studied your vessel design," she said. "Fascinating engineering, but surprisingly vulnerable once you understand the design philosophy. Your empire has what, 47 core worlds? We've already mapped them all." The silence in the council chamber that day was deafening. Even I stopped drinking my fermented root juice. Since then, an uneasy tension has existed. The Senate officially recognized humans as a protected developing species, a designation usually reserved for civilizations we want to study but not interact with. The Malkori, humiliated but still powerful, retreated to lick their wounds and plot revenge. Emperor Vrax'Zenith became obsessed with humans. The Earth problem, he called it in official communications. Unofficially, he referred to it as his future hunting preserve. Stupid, arrogant Vrax'Zenith. If only he'd known what was coming for him. If only any of us had .so there we were in the Senate chamber, all pretending to care about Zorblaxian border disputes, when this human walks in through the service entrance. Not just any human, mind you. This one was tall, even for their species, with shoulders that looked like they could support a small spacecraft. Dressed in some kind of tactical armor that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. No ceremonial robes, no diplomatic insignia, not even trying to look like they belonged, just striding in like they owned the place. The security drones immediately surrounded them, weapons primed. "Halt and identify yourself," the chief security officer, a nervous Cantaxian named Greel, squeaked through his translator. Poor Greel, his species evolved from burrowing creatures, and they get twitchy in open spaces, even on good days. The human didn't even break stride, just kept walking straight toward the central podium while every ambassador, attaché, and aide in the chamber watched in stunned silence. I could hear Governor Blixnar's breathing sacs inflating rapidly, his species' version of hyperventilation. "This is highly irregular," Chancellor Pell Nexus sputtered, his ceremonial headpiece wobbling precariously. "Security, remove this intruder immediately." None of the security personnel moved. They simply couldn't process what they were seeing. Neither could the rest of us, if I'm being honest. The human was carrying something dripping a viscous purple fluid onto the immaculate nanofiber carpeting, the same carpeting that cost more than the annual GDP of 16 developing worlds, as we were constantly reminded whenever anyone spilled anything. What is the meaning of this? Ambassador Tuz Ka bubbled through her methane translator, her containment sphere drifting backward nervously. The human reached the center of the chamber and stopped. One smooth motion, they lifted the object they'd been carrying and tossed it onto the central discussion table with a wet thud. And there it was. The head of Emperor Vrax'Zenith of the Malkori Empire. All 6 eyes glazed over, mandibles frozen in what looked like a final scream. royal antenna still twitching with residual neural activity. "Sweet mother of gravity," I whispered, dropping my datapad with a clatter. Nobody even looked my way. All eyes and other sensory organs were fixed on that hideous trophy. The Malkori delegation exploded into chaos. Ambassador Vrax'Zenith, the Emperor's own clutch brother, leapt onto the table, his ceremonial blade drawn. "Murderer," he shrieked in his native tongue before the translators could even kick in. "Abomination." The human didn't flinch. Didn't even look at the enraged Malkori. Instead, they pulled out some kind of device and projected a hologram above the Emperor's severed head. It showed the recent Malkori attack on the human colony of New Titan. The orbital bombardment, the landing of pacification troops, the use of banned nerve toxins on civilian settlements. Ambassador Vrax'Zenith froze mid-lunge, his blade still raised. The humans violated treaty boundaries, he hissed, but there was a new note in his voice. Fear. The human finally spoke. A female voice. Low, controlled, terrifying in its calmness. "My name is Commander Maya Chen of the United Earth Defense Force. You could have heard a photon drop in that chamber. 3 weeks ago, Emperor Vrax'Zenith personally ordered the attack on our colony world of New Titan. 12,000 civilians dead. 4,000 more captured for what your empire calls processing." She tapped her device again, and the hologram shifted to show something that made even my hardened diplomatic stomach turn. Humans in Malkori laboratories. The experiments, the vivisections. "We recovered our people," Commander Chen continued, her voice still eerily steady. "All of them. The Emperor was uncooperative during our discussion about where they were being held." Ambassador Vrax'Zenith made a strangled sound. "Impossible. The Emperor was on our throne world, protected by the Imperial Guard and planetary shields. No non-Malkori has ever even seen the palace, let alone penetrated it." Commander Chen smiled. Not a nice smile, the kind of smile a predator gives when its prey realizes it's already dead. "Your planetary shields have a recursion flaw in the fourth-dimensional matrix. We walked right through," she gestured at the severed head. "He didn't see us coming either." Chancellor Pell Nexus had gone so pale his scales looked almost white. This is an act of war," he managed to stammer. Commander Chen shrugged. "No, this is a receipt. I should rewind a bit and tell you what happened before Commander Chen crashed our little galactic party. Most of this I learned later through classified reports, perks of being the only competent one in my delegation. The rest came from security footage that accidentally made its way into my personal archives. Oops. It started 3 standard months ago when Emperor Vrax'Zenith called a private meeting with his war council. The Malkori had been smarting from their humiliation for years, watching as humans expanded their reach, established colonies, and worst of all started forming alliances with smaller galactic powers. The humans must be taught their place, Vrax'Zenith had declared, pacing back and forth on his 6 legs, royal cape dragging behind him. "They embarrassed us once, never again." General Draz Vor, his most trusted military advisor, clicked his mandibles nervously. "Your Magnificence, our intelligence suggests the humans have continued to advance their technology at an unsettling rate." Vrax'Zenith slammed one of his primary appendages onto the strategy table. "Are you suggesting the Malkori Empire, conquerors of 78 worlds, should fear a species that was throwing spears at each other less than 2 millennia ago?" "Not fear, Your Magnificence. Caution. Their adaptation rate is unprecedented." But the Emperor wouldn't hear it. He'd been planning this for years, a surgical strike against one of the newer human colonies. New Titan, rich in resources, strategically valuable, but far enough from Earth to make immediate reinforcement difficult. "We will demonstrate our superiority," Vrax'Zenith chittered excitedly. "Take their colony, harvest their population for study, and force the humans to acknowledge us as their betters." What the Emperor didn't know, what none of the Malkori knew, was that a human intelligence operative named Jack Reynolds had infiltrated the Imperial Palace 6 months earlier, disguised as a non-sentient maintenance drone. Can you believe that? Apparently, humans can hold completely still for hours when needed, and the Malkori are so arrogant they never bothered to scan their service units properly. Reynolds had been transmitting the Emperor's plans back to Earth Command the entire time. The humans knew exactly what was coming. But here's where it gets interesting, and by interesting, I mean absolutely insane in the way only humans can be. Earth Command decided to let the attack happen. Yes, you heard me right. They evacuated most of the colonists secretly, leaving behind just enough presence to make the colony appear fully operational. Then they filled the main settlement with wait-for-it volunteers, military personnel, who agreed to be captured. Operation Trojan, they called it. Named after some ancient human battle strategy involving a hollow wooden animal. Don't ask me, humans are weird. The Malkori fleet arrived exactly as planned. Their initial bombardment hit primarily empty buildings or holographic projections. The civilians they captured were actually elite soldiers with subdermal transponders and neural implants that could mask their life signs to appear terrified rather than combat-ready. Emperor Vrax'Zenith was delighted. The attack had gone perfectly. Minimal Malkori casualties, a valuable world captured, and hundreds of human specimens for his scientists to study. He even decided to oversee the initial examinations personally. That's when Commander Maya Chen's team struck. They'd been waiting for the Emperor to take the bait. Using the captured soldiers' transponder signals, a human stealth vessel designated Nightshade slipped through the Malkori defense grid. 10 human operatives, led by Commander Chen herself, infiltrated the Imperial research facility. According to the heavily redacted report I managed to access, what happened next was, well, let's just say the humans have a saying about hell having no fury that suddenly makes a lot more sense to me now. The extraction team freed all the captured humans within 23 minutes. No alarms triggered. The guards never even knew they were there until they found themselves staring at empty restraint beds. But Commander Chen wasn't finished. The Emperor had made a critical error. He'd brought the coordinates for all planned future attacks against human settlements to the research facility. His scientists needed population data for their processing priorities. Not only did Chen's team steal this intelligence, but they also replaced it with false information that would have led the Malkori fleet directly into an ambush if they had attempted to use it. And then, instead of escaping as planned, Commander Chen made a command decision. She split her team, ordering the majority to get the rescued colonists to safety, while she and 2 others went after a bigger target. Emperor Vrax'Zenith, the most heavily guarded individual in the Malkori Empire, protected by technological and biological security measures developed over millennia, surrounded by elite guards genetically engineered for absolute loyalty. It should have been impossible. 17 hours later, Commander Chen walked out of the Imperial Palace with the Emperor's head in a stasis bag. Her 2 team members carried something even more valuable: the Emperor's personal command codes and authentication markers. With those, they could have ordered the entire Malkori fleet to self-destruct. They didn't, though. That wasn't the plan. "We need to send a message," Chen had reportedly said during their extraction. Not just to the Malkori, to everyone. And that message was about to be delivered to the Galactic Senate in the most dramatic way possible. As I watched her standing there in the Senate chamber, the Emperor's head dripping onto our precious carpet, I finally understood what our xenopsychologists had been warning us about for years. Humans don't just fight to win. They fight to ensure you never want to fight them again. Remember how I mentioned the Senate chamber was designed to accommodate 247 different species? Well, when those species all panic simultaneously, it's quite the spectacle. The moment Commander Chen dropped her bombshell, both figuratively and literally, with that head, absolute chaos erupted. I'm talking biblical, end-of-galaxy pandemonium. The Voltari delegation, being empathic sensitives, immediately began wailing and clutching their sensory tendrils. They could literally feel the emotional tsunami washing through the room. Poor bastards probably needed therapy for months afterward. Order. I demand order. Chancellor Pell Nexus was screeching, pounding his ceremonial gavel so hard it actually cracked. Nobody paid him the slightest attention. The Chancellor's authority extended exactly as far as everyone's willingness to pretend he had any, and that willingness had just evaporated faster than water on a neutron star. Ambassador Vrax'Zenith was still frozen in place, staring at his Emperor's severed head. Then he began making this high-pitched keening sound, the Malkori equivalent of a nervous breakdown. The rest of the Malkori delegation surrounded him, forming a defensive circle, their ceremonial weapons now looking considerably more practical. "The humans have gone rogue," shrieked Representative Glocks of the Mercantile Alliance. his credit calculator clutched to his chest like a security blanket. Our profit projections are ruined. Several species were already heading for the exits. The Iridian ambassador actually leapt from his hover platform and began burrowing into the floor. Instinct takes over in moments of stress, and apparently his species' instinct was dig a hole and hide. The Zentari military attaché was trying to contact her fleet, raise shields on all Zentari vessels, battle stations. This is not a drill. She was overreacting, of course, but then again, her species evolved from prey animals. Jumpy lot. And through it all, Commander Chen stood perfectly still in the center of the maelstrom, somehow looking both completely relaxed and absolutely deadly at the same time. The security drones still hovered around her, weapons drawn but powered down. They recognized a superior predator when they saw one. I found myself oddly calm, actually. Probably shock. I kept typing notes into my backup data pad. Historic diplomatic incident unfolding. Possible start of galactic war. Recommend increasing personal life insurance policy. A loud crack suddenly cut through the chaos, not the Chancellor's gavel this time, but the sound of Ambassador Trell firing his ceremonial phase pistol into the ceiling. Silence, he roared, all four eyes blazing. The chamber gradually quieted, if only out of shock that someone had actually discharged a weapon in the Senate. That hadn't happened since the great taxation debate of 4498, which had ended with 3 dead accountants and a very embarrassed Hygelian tax adjuster. "We will have order," Trell continued, lowering his weapon. "The human will explain herself, and we will listen. Then we will decide whether to exterminate her species or merely censure them severely." Commander Chen actually laughed at that. Not a nervous laugh, or an evil cackle, but a genuine sound of amusement. It echoed unnervingly around the suddenly silent chamber. "Ambassador Trell," she said, still smiling, "your phase pistol design has a critical flaw in its containment matrix. If you fire it again, it'll explode and take your arm with it." Trell's face scales paled as he slowly, carefully placed his ceremonial weapon on the table. "Now then," Chen continued, as if discussing nothing more dramatic than the weather, "shall we talk about the future of galactic relations? I believe I have everyone's attention." She certainly did. Even the maintenance droids had stopped cleaning to watch. And I realized I was witnessing something unprecedented in galactic politics, a complete reversal of power dynamics, accomplished with a single act of audacious violence and a whole lot of terrifying confidence. The age of overlooking humanity was officially over. Once the initial shock had subsided and everyone had either retaken their seats or at least stopped actively fleeing, Commander Chen began to speak again. Her voice wasn't particularly loud, yet somehow it carried to every corner of the vast chamber. The translation systems barely kept up, struggling to convey not just her words but the steel behind them. "For too long, the Galactic Senate has operated under the delusion that humanity would be content with the scraps thrown our way," she said, pacing slowly around the Emperor's head like a predator circling wounded prey. "Protected developing species status. Limited trading rights. Restricted territorial claims." Chancellor Pelnexus had regained some of his composure, though his scales were still an unhealthy shade of gray. "These restrictions are standard for all new species joining the galactic community," he protested weakly. "There are protocols, traditions dating back millennia." "Traditions," Commander Chen interrupted, "designed to keep newer civilizations dependent on established powers, to ensure the old empires maintain their advantages while pretending to welcome us as equals." She tapped her wrist device, and a new hologram appeared above the central table. The galaxy, with political boundaries clearly marked. The tiny section allocated to human expansion glowed blue against the vast swathes of color representing other empires. "The Malkori have violated our borders 6 times in the past standard year," she continued, and red markers began appearing along the human territory. "The Zentari have established listening posts in neutral space specifically to monitor our communications." More markers appeared. "The Rigelian Concordat has been charging us triple the standard tariffs for passage through their jump gates." With each accusation, the relevant delegation squirmed or protested or suddenly found the ceiling fascinating. I kept typing furiously. This was the kind of diplomatic dirt that careers are made on. "Each time we've brought these violations to the Senate's attention, we've been told to file official protests, to wait our turn, To understand that as newcomers, we must be patient. Her voice took on an edge that made several diplomats flinch. Meanwhile, the Malkori Empire was planning a systematic extermination of human colonies, beginning with New Titan. Ambassador Vrax'Zenith had recovered enough to hiss, "These are baseless accusations." The Malkori Empire was merely responding to human provocation. Commander Chen's smile was terrifying in its calmness. "Perhaps you'd like to explain that to your emperor?" "Oh wait," she gestured at the head on the table. Then she straightened and squared her shoulders. The moment had come. I could feel it. This was why she'd come here, why she'd made such a dramatic entrance. Not just for revenge, something bigger. "Humanity has decided that the current arrangement is no longer acceptable," she announced. "Effective immediately, we are claiming a defensive perimeter extending 15 light-years in all directions from each of our existing colonies and Earth itself." Gasps and outraged exclamations echoed through the chamber. That would increase human territory at least tenfold. "This is outrageous," sputtered Ambassador Noor of the Galactic Trade Federation. "You can't simply redraw established boundaries." "We just did," Commander Chen replied evenly. "And we will defend these boundaries with all necessary force." "You're threatening war against the entire Senate." Chancellor Pelnexus looked like he might faint. "Not at all, Chancellor. We're simply informing you of our new security requirements. Any species that respects these boundaries will find humans to be excellent neighbors and trading partners. Those who challenge these boundaries," she let her gaze drift meaningfully to the Emperor's head. She then pulled a small data crystal from her armor and placed it next to the grisly trophy. "This contains evidence of the Malkori violations, the coordinates of our new territorial claims, and a proposal for a revised relationship between humanity and the Galactic Senate." "What kind of relationship?" asked Ambassador Trell cautiously. "One of mutual respect," Commander Chen replied. "We don't want your worlds. We don't want your people. We simply want what's ours, and the freedom to develop without interference." She paused, and for the first time I saw something other than cold determination in her eyes. Something almost like hope. "Despite appearances, we didn't come here seeking war. The head of Emperor Vrax'Zenith isn't just a warning. It's proof of what happens when you underestimate humans, yes, but it's also an opportunity." "An opportunity?" echoed the Chancellor skeptically. Commander Chen nodded. "For a new beginning. The old Emperor is dead. The old rules no longer apply. You can fight us and discover firsthand why that's a bad idea. Or you can work with us and discover why humans also make the best allies you've ever had." She folded her arms across her chest and surveyed the chamber. "You have 1 standard hour to decide. You'd think that having a severed head deposited in your legislative chamber might lead to some dramatic response. A declaration of war, perhaps. Sanctions, at minimum. But that's not what happened. Want to know what the mighty Galactic Senate did when faced with Commander Chen's ultimatum? They capitulated, completely and utterly. Oh, they dressed it up nicely. Called it the Mutual Security and Cooperation Accord, spoke of new eras and progressive partnerships and other diplomatic nonsense. But everyone in that chamber knew exactly what had happened. Humanity had walked in, dropped the severed head of one of the most powerful rulers in the galaxy on our table, demanded recognition, and we'd given it to them. The hour Commander Chen had granted for deliberation was the most frantic 60 minutes I've ever witnessed. Emergency subcommittees formed and dissolved in minutes. Ancient enemies suddenly huddled together in urgent consultation. The Regelian ambassador actually fainted when his analysts showed him the projections of a potential human-Regelian conflict. Ambassador Vrax'Zenith, now technically the new Malkori Emperor, was perhaps the most surprising. After his initial outrage, he'd gone completely silent, conferring only with his senior military advisor. When the Senate reconvened, it was Vrax'Zenith who spoke first. "The Malkori Empire acknowledges the territorial claims of humanity," he stated, each word clearly painful. "We propose a non-aggression pact and open diplomatic channels for reparations regarding the New Titan incident." You could have knocked me over with a solar flare. The Malkori offering reparations? Unheard of. But the new emperor wasn't finished. Looking directly at Commander Chen, he added, "We also request the return of our former emperor's remains for proper funerary rites." Chen nodded once. "Granted. The rest of him is in stasis aboard our vessel." The other delegations followed suit with almost embarrassing eagerness. The Zentari pledged to dismantle their surveillance outposts. The Rigelians offered preferential trading status. Even the notoriously isolationist Vordani suggested a cultural exchange program. Chancellor Pel Nexus, desperate to salvage some appearance of authority, quickly called for a formal vote on the new human territorial claims. The result? Unanimous approval. I don't think we've had a unanimous vote on whether water is wet. And just like that, the galactic balance of power shifted. A species that had been scratching around on a single planet less than 3 centuries ago was now a major power, with territories rivaling those of civilizations thousands of years older. Commander Chen accepted the Senate's decision with that same unnerving calm. No gloating, no victory speech. She simply collected her data crystal, nodded respectfully to each delegation, and prepared to leave, pausing only to hand the Emperor's head to a visibly nauseated Malkori aide. As she reached the doors, Ambassador Trell called out, "Commander, was it worth it? The risk of coming here alone, of potentially starting a galaxy-wide conflict." Chen turned back, and for the first time I saw her truly smile. Not the predatory smile from earlier, but something genuine. "Who said I came alone, Ambassador?" And with that cryptic statement, she was gone, leaving us to wonder exactly how many human operatives might be among us. The maintenance droid suddenly received unprecedented scrutiny. That was 3 rotations ago. Since then, human diplomatic delegations have arrived properly, through the front doors. Trade agreements are being signed, cultural exchanges planned. On the surface, everything seems to be normalizing. But make no mistake, nothing will ever be the same again. Now, when humans speak, the Senate listens. When their ships appear on scanners, other vessels change course. Their ambassadors are treated with a deference previously reserved for only the most ancient species. As for me, I got promoted. Turns out being the only one who kept comprehensive notes during a historic galactic incident has its advantages. I'm now first secretary to the Dorixian ambassador. I even have my own office with a view of the Senate gardens. And on my desk sits a small Earth plant. A gift from the new human ambassador. The card that came with it simply read "To New Beginnings." I'm still not sure if it was a friendly gesture or a subtle reminder. Probably both. That's humans for you.